Okay, getting very close to the exam now, and let's make a start with body and soul, personal identity. So we've got four short clips I'm going to do back to back now. And the first one, we're going to look at materialism and dualism and look at some scholars like Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, and Aquinas. So let me share my screen with you, and let's get straight into this. Here we go. So, body, soul, personal identity. These are the scholars and the two main areas that we're going to focus on. First of all, materialism and dualism. And we always start with the question, what is death? A very complete definition of death is that it is the permanent cessation of all vital functions in a living creature, the complete and absolute end of life. So that is the cessation. Cessation means to cease to exist. All people agree on the first part, that death is the permanent cessation, the ending of all of our vital organs and vital functions in our body. But we don't all necessarily agree with the fact that death is the end of life. And this is what this whole topic is really looking towards, whether we have a soul and whether our body is necessary for us to continue to live in our existence, whether our soul needs our body, whether our soul even is there, and whether there is anything in the afterlife after our death. So how could life possibly continue? Well, a quick summary of some of the things we're going to be focused on tonight is that it could be through our genes, in our children, in our descendants. We live on in our life's work. There's a legacy that is there for us and from us. We live on in the memory of other people. People remember us, and as that continues, we also continue. We exist after death. The immortality of the soul, a good key word there to refer to, immortality meaning never ever ending. And resurrection of the body, we could come back from the dead, and that could be summoned by an almighty God type figure. And reincarnation, that our soul from the Hindu faith will go from one life cycle to the next, living on. So we're going to focus on materialism and dualism, two main theories of human nature. Materialists ultimately, in general, believe that the mind and the body of a human are completely inseparable. They are one and they are the same. You can't have one without the other. Dualists, however, believe that humans consist of a body and of a soul, and that they are distinct. They are separate in that sense, and that they are two distinct, very different things. So let's focus on materialism first of all. Put very simply, there is no soul. Most materialists say that at death, the whole person just completely and utterly ceases to exist. We've got Gilbert Ryle, and Gilbert Ryle, in his book, The Concept of the Mind, that he wrote in 1949, comes up with this idea, this analogy of a ghost in a machine. And he argued that it was a category mistake to refer to the idea of the soul. It didn't make any sense. In fact, he said to speak of a soul was a complete mistake in the language itself. And this results in people speaking of the mind and of the body as completely different phenomena, as if the soul was completely something different that we could identify within the body. He goes on to talk about the idea of a cricketer in a cricket match who might refer to, within the game, he might say, but where's the team spirit right here? And it's one of those arbitrary statements that in language doesn't really make any sense, and therefore is a category mistake of language. So to talk about the soul, he said, was a silly idea, this idea of a ghost in a machine. And it seems like nonsense. He argued that any talk of a soul was talk about the way in which a person acted and integrated with others in the world. It wasn't separate and distinct. So there are two types of materialists that we can distinguish. The first are hard, the second are soft. Hard materialists say that all characteristics are physical ones. Our entire body, our life is made up of a physical mass. Soft materialists, however, do say that some of our characteristics are not physical. Our emotions, for example, those aren't physical things. So there is a part of us that isn't physical. Our mind, hard materialists say, can't be separated from the body, but soft materialists say that our mind and our body are completely related to each other. So for hard materialists, our mind can't be separated from our body at all. They are completely inseparable. But the mind and the body are related with soft materialists. They interact, they relate with each other. Hard materialists say that our consciousness is just brain activity, that whenever we think, our memories, etc., all those things are just purely our brain buzzing around. But for soft materialists, consciousness is a little bit more than brain activity. It perhaps identifies a little bit more about who we are. For hard materialists, when the body dies, so does the brain. Brain dead, our body's dead, we're dead, nothing ceases, nothing continues to exist, we cease. But for soft materialists, when the body dies, also the brain dies. So there's no difference whatsoever. But here are the key distinctions, just to remember and recap. Not all of the characteristics we have for soft materialists are physical, some are emotions. Mind and body are related, rather than being never separated and inseparable. The consciousness is more than just brain activity. So for materialists, there's no scientific evidence for the soul. We can't find the soul in the body, and the body is just matter. It's just physical mass. Therefore, there is no soul for a materialist. Well, for most materialists. The materialist argument against the afterlife would be something like life depends on a functioning brain, a nervous system, and a physical body. So our life depends completely on those things to exist. Death involves the destruction of those things, the brain, the nervous system, the body. Therefore, our life ends at death. Without any physical form, life just can't be supported. So let's have a look at dualism. I want to hold those thoughts about materialism because even though it says there is no afterlife, we're going to later be able to see that there are materialist views which still ascertain and hold on to an afterlife. So dualism. Dualism is the idea that our mind determines our personality. Our mind determines who we are. Our body is a shell for the real self. Our body is a carcass that encases who we really are. And our body is contingent. It will end at some point. Our body doesn't go on forever. It's not necessary for other things eternally. Our body is contingent and it will die. It will decay. The mind is immortal, however. Our mind is the part of us that lives on forever. And that is the part of us that considers higher realities, like things like truth and goodness and justice. And Plato really focuses on those things. So let's look at our first scholar, Plato, who is a dualist. He says the body and the soul are two separate things that interact with each other. They cross paths, they need each other, but they interact. Soul is immortal, and it contains who we really are. So our soul is the part of us that is us. And Plato developed this idea of forms. We don't need to go into great depth and detail about the forms, but it's this idea really that our body belongs to this physical contingent world that will die and will end. It's temporal, ephemeral, but our soul wants to go to this world of ideas and stay there for eternity. Why? Because this world of ideas is perfect. And what we are experiencing in this physical world right now is imperfect. It's not real. It's fake. It's effectively like a type of doppelganger or a type of fake version of what there is in the perfect world of forms. And that is where our soul is looking to end up, in the perfect world of forms. So for Plato, he's a dualist. Our body and our soul are two separate things that interact. Aristotle, Plato's mentee, if you like, Aristotle said that the soul is a part of the body. He did believe that the soul and the body are not really separable. It's a part of the body. And it's what turns the physical form into a living thing of a particular type. So a word that is used is animate. For Aristotle, our soul is what animates our body and makes our body come to life. It's what gives it life. It's the ruach, if you like, if we were talking from a biblical Hebrew perspective, from God, the ruach, the breath of life breathed into the human body, and bringing it to life, giving it soul. For Aristotle, the soul is that breath of life in the physical form. The soul and the body are completely inseparable. The soul is inseparable. They need each other to survive. The soul develops character. It develops who we are, but it can't survive death. If we die, the soul dies. But does this make Aristotle a materialist? And that's something that a lot of people question. Well, he did believe that the body and the soul were different, and this is what is important. It's important to remember this. A true materialist definition is not simply about what happens in the afterlife. It's actually just purely about the relationship between the body and the soul. And so because Aristotle believed that the relationship between the body and the soul, even though the soul is part of the body, he did decide that they were two distinct, separate things as well. They were distinguishable. The soul is not the body is not the soul, but yet they are part of each other and they need each other to survive. The difference between a materialist is that a materialist says the soul and the body are one. And that's what really matters here in making that distinction. So let's move on to Descartes. We've got two more to go, Descartes and then Aquinas. Descartes, René Descartes, the French philosopher, he was a dualist as well. And he said that the mind includes all of our feelings and our sensations that we can't locate physically in our body. And he concluded with cogito ergo sum, his famous phrase, I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, it's really important. He dealt with existence. He was really going quite crazy at one point because he didn't even know whether he truly existed. He couldn't figure out a way of proving his existence. And he came to the conclusion, after having this kind of idea that there was a demon on his shoulder telling him that you don't exist, you don't exist, you don't exist. And when this demon was telling him you don't exist, Descartes eventually came to the conclusion that this demon on his shoulder only exists because Descartes thinks he exists. And therefore, if Descartes thinks he doesn't exist, the demon disappears. And then what happens is, he says, well, hold on a minute. If that's true, then I am real. I exist because I think I do. Therefore, if I think I do, it must be more than just in my mind. It's in reality. Therefore, I am. I exist. Ergo. You see, the mind and the body for Descartes then are different things. They are distinct. Each have their own special characteristics. Our mind is a substance, and our mind is what we think. It's our ability to think. And our body is purely material, and it just takes up space. And for Descartes, the soul was found in the pineal gland of the brain. So for Descartes, there was a soul, and our mind is distinct. Our soul exists in our brain where our mind is, and it exists as a separate thing to the body. He's a dualist. For Descartes, he concluded that identity, who we are, our personal identity, comes from thinking and reasoning. The ability to rationalize. It's conceivable that we could survive our body and remain the same person. So we could live on out of our body and still be us because our mind exists, our soul exists, our reasoning. He believed that our body did not be needed to be living an intellectual life. Our body is not intellectual, doesn't reason, therefore we don't need our body. We can make drastic changes to our body. We can cosmetically change it, but we remain the same person. I may change my face and look like someone completely different, but if I do that, it doesn't really make a difference because my body isn't me. He believed that after death, our soul can live on with God. It's our soul that is immortal and separate. So St. Thomas Aquinas, finally, a Christian, he agreed with Aristotle. He said that the soul animates the body. It gives it life. And that would make sense because of God's idea in scripture that he breathed life into people. He said that the soul operates completely separate from the body. And the only things that are divisible decay. Only things that can be divided then rot. The soul is not divisible, but the body is. We can divide the body, but we can't split the soul. And therefore, Aquinas said that our soul is separate from our body and is immortal, it survives death. He links the two together, however, because the soul can retain individual identity, but he also believed in the resurrection because he was a Christian. So there is a link between the body and the soul. The soul animates the body, gives it life, but the soul survives death when the body doesn't. So we're going to move on to our second part in our next video.